Eastern. And be sure to watch In-Depth Fiction Edition next month when author Brad Meltzer will be our guest on Book TV on C-SPAN 2.
With 13 days until the election, C-SPAN is your primary source for Campaign 2018. Next, a look at a House race in Kansas between Republican Steve Watkins and Democrat Paul Davis. They're running for the seat of Republican Representative Lynn Jenkins, who's retiring. Politico has the race listed as a toss-up. This is 35 minutes.
This is a 13 News Special Election 2018 presentation.
And good evening again, everybody. Welcome into this Election 2018 special coverage from 13 News. I'm Ralph Hipp alongside Melissa Bruner, and Sean Wheat is joining us. Tonight, we help you get to know those two leading candidates in a key race in the midterms, the race for Congress in District 2.
Paul Davis ran unopposed in the Democrats' primary, and for the Republicans, Steve Watkins topped a field of 7 to earn the GOP nomination.
Now, here's how our discussion will unfold. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement. Each will get 1 minute to answer each question, and we'll reserve 1.5 minutes for each candidate to offer a closing statement at the end.
We'll go right through to 7 o'clock here, and the candidates drew numbers to determine which one of them would go first. So with being our opening statements, we go to Paul Davis. Mr. Davis?
Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Paul Davis. I'm a lifelong Kansan. I'm the son of 2 teachers. I'm a husband. I'm a father. My wife and I are raising our daughter here because Kansas is our home. I started this campaign with a 25-county listening tour in the 2nd District, and I've been back time and time again. I've heard your concerns about how Washington just doesn't seem to listen to us anymore. They don't seem to care about us. We have a broken Congress, and we have no choice but to fix it. In order to do that, we have to send problem solvers to Washington, people who know how to get things done, people who aren't afraid to work with the other party. That's what I did for 12 years in the state legislature, and it's why 36 current and former Republican elected officials support my campaign. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and work with anyone to tackle America's problems, to lower our health care costs, to get our economy working for working people again, and to make sure that our Congress is accountable to us and not the special interests.
Thank you. An opening statement from Mr. Watkins.
Thank you very much. My name is Steve Watkins. I'm the Republican nominee for Congress. My message tonight is very simple. I'm the Republican, and I'm up against a Democrat. Now, I'm a political outsider. I'm a fighter, and I fought for you in Afghanistan. I'd like to do that on Capitol Hill. I want to fight for a government that's more efficient, effective, and more accountable. And to us, that means you get to keep more of your paycheck. It means that our borders are secure, and so are our communities. And it means that we have access to quality health care. That, or we can elect a Democratic-led Congress and face more gridlock and more mob rule, and we're better than that. So please join me this November. Love to serve you.
Thank you, candidates. We get into the questions now. It's no secret Mr. Davis has held political office before, while Mr. Watkins is in his first campaign. So this first question, if you could tell us, why is having political experience a good thing or a bad thing? We start the answers with Mr. Davis.
Well, for 12 years, I worked with Republicans, and I built bipartisan coalition after bipartisan coalition. Whether it was making a historic investment in our public schools in 2005, or whether it was balancing our state budget at the height of the Great Recession in 2009, or passing our comprehensive transportation plan, the largest job-creating program in state history, in 2010. I've been there working with Republicans to get things done and get results. And I think now more than ever, we need people like that in Congress. We need problem solvers, people who are willing to tackle the tough issues and aren't afraid to work across the aisle and also aren't afraid to buck their own party. I am an American and a Kansan long before I am a Democrat.
Thank you. Mr. Watkins.
Thank you. Now, I'm an engineer, I'm a builder, I'm a qualified paratrooper and an Army Ranger, and I'm a Christian, a family man, a dog sled racer and a mountaineer. But you're right, I'm not a politician, I'm not even a lawyer. But you know, we knock on over 1,000 doors a day. And oftentimes what we hear, not to persuade, but to listen, what we hear is that people are tired and they want to change. They're tired of the partisan gridlock on Capitol Hill. So oftentimes when we say, I'm an outsider, often they say, that's all we need to hear. You're our guy. So I want to work hard for you. I've helped solve problems in the Middle East. I've worked overseas for 8 years of my life. And during that time, I learned how and why America is so great. So it'd be an honor to serve you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Well, for both gentlemen, many voters consider immigration the top issue in this congressional election. We've seen the wave of immigrants at the southern border tonight. What should the U.S. do about people who are currently in the country illegally or trying to get into the country illegally? And we'll start with you, Mr. Watkins.
Sure. First, I'd like to say that I'm a build the wall guy. I think it's not mean-spirited or bigoted to have a wonderful and a generous and prosperous country, and we need to build a wall so that we can help assure that things are not trafficked through there that we don't want. Also, I want to look at sanctuary cities. I don't believe that we should fund them, and I don't believe in chain migration or visa lottery. Now, that being said, we are a nation of immigrants, a compassionate one. You know, my wife is an immigrant, and so we got to look at the immigration system and pass legislation that protects, that assures that those who are here do not live in fear out of that they'll get deported. Now, if they've been paying their taxes and following their rules, then we'll set them, give them a legal status. If not, if you're a felon, then you're gone.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
You know, the issue of immigration is there's no greater example of a Congress that just can't seem to get anything done. They're just fighting with each other all the time, and we need comprehensive immigration reform. It starts with border security. We need more resources to make sure that we stem the tide of people that are coming across our border. I want to listen to the experts as to how we best do that. I support ICE. ICE plays a critical role in combating human trafficking, a problem that here in Kansas we unfortunately know too much about. I do not support sanctuary cities. I believe that law enforcement at all levels needs to work together to stem our immigration problems. But we do need to provide an earned path to citizenship for those who are here contributing to our economy, paying taxes, and playing by the rules. We've got to send a problem solver to Congress if we are going to finally get comprehensive immigration reform that works for America.
All right.
Thank you, candidates. They'll be answering questions from you coming up.
Welcome back in. More of our live 13 News Forum with the two candidates in the race for District 2 of Congress, and we also welcome in Sean Wheaton.
All right, thank you very much. We want them to address issues on your mind. So our next couple of questions come from viewers. Listen to the first one.
I'm Diana Slavens from Topeka, Kansas. I would like the candidates to address the PAC groups. I would like to see them do away with that and only have ads by the candidates themselves. I would like to see, how could that happen?
Well, to recap those questions, we're seeing a lot of PAC ads from both sides. Should they be limited? We'll start off with Paul Davis.
Well, Diana, I couldn't agree with you more. When I was in the legislature, I fought for campaign finance reform year after year for more transparency and accountability. I think the greatest problem that we have in politics today is the excessive amount of money that we have. A lot of these ads are being paid for by billionaires that don't even live in Kansas. And every time I see one of these ads, I think, you know, they're just drowning out the voices of ordinary Kansans like Diana. So we badly need campaign finance reform. I have committed that that is going to be the very first bill that I introduce. We need to get rid of dark money. You know, Steve's dad put about $700,000 into a PAC to help him get through the primary. It's legal, but I don't think it should be legal. We need to get big money out of politics once and for all.
Thank you. Mr. Watkins.
It's a great question, Diane. Thank you for asking. Yes, when talking about campaign finance, we do need more transparency in the system. There is a lot of money flooding into Kansas 2nd, and the reason for that is because people realize how important this race truly is. The control of the House could very well come down to Kansas 2nd. So I'd point out that my opponent, Paul Davis, he's been supported to the tune of some $4 million by outside groups. And those groups are being, a lot of that money is being driven by Nancy Pelosi and people who are like-minded. So my question there is, how can you distance yourself from Nancy Pelosi while still receiving that money?
All right, we now move on to our second viewer question. Take a listen.
My name is Steve Hare. I'm from Topeka, Kansas, and my question has to do with Social Security being taxed, and the income limits for when people are taxed, in my opinion, need to be raised and adjusted for inflation, as they've not been adjusted since 1983. Where do you stand on helping people who receive Social Security make sure they retain all their benefits?
Let's go and recap that for you. The question is about preserving Social Security benefits and income limits. We start off with Steve Watkins.
It's a great question, Steve. Thank you for asking. Now, we made a deal, and we can't go back on that deal. Those who paid into Social Security and Medicare, those basically at or reaching retirement age. Now, we owe them, and my proposals have, they ask that we don't change any of that. Instead, now moving forward, these systems are not on track to stay solvent. Moving forward, we need to implement things like means testing and perhaps over a period of time looking at the age in which those benefits kick in. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
You know, Social Security is a commitment that has been made to all Americans. We all pay into the system, and we expect it to be there when we retire. 66 million Americans rely upon Social Security. One of those people is my mom. It's a big part of her livelihood, and she reminds me of that. I think that we must ensure that Social Security is going to be there for senior citizens today and for those of us who are going to be senior citizens way on down the road. Now, Steve said something the other day that frankly concerns me. He said that he would be open to privatizing the Social Security system. I don't believe that that is the right route to go. We have to make sure the Social Security system is solvent and it's going to be there, and we honor that commitment that we have made to America's senior citizens, and I will do that in the Congress.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, the big issue of health care right now. To what extent would you support continuing the efforts of fully repealing Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act? What parts might you keep? Paul Davis, will begin with you on health care.
You know, the issue of health care is a very personal one to me. My dad passed away earlier this year, and he had Parkinson's disease. And he had numerous medications that he had to take, one of which cost over $1,000 a month. And my parents and I had to have that kitchen table discussion about how in the world they were going to be able to afford that. That's a discussion that far too many Americans are having. I believe that we need to preserve what we like about our healthcare system, things like being able to keep our kids on our insurance until they're 26 years old. And then we need to fix what needs to be fixed in our healthcare system and move on with trying to do something about cost. You know, prescription drugs are the biggest driver of cost out there, and it's time that we have a conversation with the drug companies that says enough is enough. You can't raise our drug costs year after year after year. Now, what Steve wants to do is he wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which is going to put us back in a place where insurance companies can discriminate against people because they have a pre-existing condition like cancer or diabetes. I think that's wrong.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have more questions to come, but also we want to know what the candidates have to ask each other. I'm sorry, we need to get an answer first from Mr. Watkins.
Sure. Healthcare is a large and complex series of systems, and it ought to be built on a platform of free market economics. That's how you get the prices to lower. Now, I want to clarify a few things. I do believe that those with pre-existing conditions need to be protected. My opponent believes and is supported by those who believe in a Medicare for all. No, Medicare is for those at or reaching retirement. Now, Medicare for all will require some $32 trillion to be added to the debt, resulting in perhaps the largest tax increase in history. So we need to lower prices, and we do that by building our complex system on a platform of free market exchange. This is something that's very important to me and very personal because my father's a physician and so is my wife. These are conversations that we've had around the dinner table a lot, and it's important to all Kansans. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we are going to hear what the candidates have to ask each other. That is when our forum with 2nd District frontrunners Steve Watkins and Paul Davis continues.
Well, now we'll be listening in with you as we offer the candidates a chance to ask a question of each other.
They will have 30 seconds to ask the question. Answers are still 1 minute, and we begin with Mr. Watkins asking your question of Mr. Davis.
Paul, there's been a lot of talk about conservative groups supporting my campaign, well, because they know I'm a conservative. But Nancy Pelosi's dark money groups have now invested almost $4 million in your campaign. Have you promised them to vote as a liberal, or are they just looking at your extremely liberal voting record in the Kansas State House and trusting that you aren't going to flip-flop. In essence, what is Nancy Pelosi getting for her $4 million?
You know, I committed on the first day of this campaign that I would not support Nancy Pelosi. That has not changed, and it will not change. I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody that Democratic groups tend to support Democratic candidates and Republican groups support Republican candidates. But if you look at my record in the legislature, you'll see that I voted with Republicans 75% of the time. It's one of the reasons why 36 current and former Republican elected officials support my campaign, because they know that I know how to work across the aisle, and that's what we need in Congress right now. We need problem solvers. We need people who are going to be Americans long before they are Democrats and Republicans, and that's exactly what I've done, and that's exactly what I'll do in Congress.
Thank you. Your turn now, Mr. Davis. Your question for Mr. Watkins.
Steve, your opponents in the Republican primary called you a liar, a fraud, and a rank opportunist. I can understand a little bit of that because you just lied to people about Medicare for all. I've never supported Medicare for all, and I haven't. You claim that you supported President Trump, but you didn't vote for him. You claim to support law enforcement, but you condone comments calling law enforcement officers racist and criminal thugs. You claim that you owned a company and you started it from scratch, and you didn't. If Kansans can't trust you to be honest about your past, how can we trust you with our futures?
See, this is why I'm running for Congress. If people don't like your policy and they don't have a voting record upon which to sling arrows at, they go after your character. Now, we've seen that even at the national level. We've seen that with Justice Kavanaugh, with 36-year-old allegations with no corroborating evidence. This is what they do. This is what Democrats do when they don't have a voting record upon which to critique. So every single one of those allegations is at very best a half-truth, but most certainly an accurate portrayal. Now, I went to West Point. There's a code at West Point that a cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. And lying is defined by an attempt to deceive. Now, Mr. Davis knows that these articles attempt to deceive voters, but my belief is that voters are smarter than that, and they can see through that, and we're tired of it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Move on to our next question now. Several states are making their own laws regarding marijuana. Recreational pot became legal in Canada this week. Where do you stand? To what extent, if any, should the U.S. move to decriminalize marijuana? We start off now with Paul Davis.
I have supported medical marijuana. I supported this when I was in the legislature, largely because of a family that lived in my community who had a cute little boy named Otis who had hundreds of seizures every day, and the only product that could help him was a medicinal marijuana product. I support decriminalization efforts, and many of those efforts are going on at the local level. What I am not ready to embrace, though, is a support for a full recreational marijuana. A number of states have done that, and I think we need to see how those experiments are going to take place and what's going to transpire, and then we can make our own decisions. Most of these issues are going to be decided at the state level as well.
Thank you. Mr. Watkins.
This is a state issue. I will say that having spent 10 years in the military and having a lot of friends and soldiers diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, I know some of them have found some treatment solace in medicinal marijuana. So I'm not inherently object to it, but it is a state issue. I am against recreational marijuana. Thank you.
Right. We set our sights on the economy when our forum here live from 13 News with our 2nd District congressional candidates returns in just a moment.
Welcome back to 13 News. We continue our discussion with the 2nd District congressional candidates with some economic issues. Under what circumstances do you support tariffs on goods and services from other countries? We get our first response from Steve Watkins.
I'm a capitalist and I'm a free trade thinker, so as a general matter, I don't believe in tariffs. Now, I talk with a lot of producers, a lot of growers, a lot of professionals in the ag community and manufacturers as well. Now, they're patient with Donald Trump and understand that the tariff is a temporary measure and that it's in support of a larger play. So we're patient and they're patient and so am I, but I'm a free trade guy.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Mr. Davis.
One of the first things that I did in this campaign was I convened an agriculture advisory committee because I wanted to hear directly from Kansas farmers. And I have had many, many conversations with farmers all across this district. And quite frankly, they're very concerned about the tariffs right now. Farm incomes are at a 12-year low. We don't have a farm bill because of the partisan bickering in Congress. And many farmers are frankly just being hurt by what's happening with the tariffs. You look at soybeans. We grow more soybeans in this district than any other crop. And when the Chinese slap a tariff on soybeans, every farmer is going to feel that. And all of us are going to feel it all down Main Street. I think that tariffs need to be carefully thought out. And I think that we need to tell President Trump that what he's doing right now is harming our communities. It's harming agriculture, which is the backbone of our economy.
And that leads into our next question. A lot of Kansas farmers and ranchers are wondering about this, while much is made of how a new trade agreement, the one with Canada and Mexico and the U.S., might help farmers. We'd like to know, as the farm bill expired September 30th, how the bill would impact Kansas farmers, and how would you work to reach agreement on it?
Well, we badly need a farm bill. Right now, a lot of farmers are harvesting soybeans, and they haven't been able to harvest those soybeans because of the excessive amount of rain that we've had. And they're reminded the importance of crop insurance. And farm bill is going to give stability to farmers on into the future. Traditionally, Congress has gone about this in a bipartisan way. And Senator Pat Roberts has helped shepherd a bipartisan bill through the Senate. That's a bill that I would support. But unfortunately, in the House, there has been partisan bickering over trying to make wholesale changes to the nutrition program, which would disenfranchise thousands of children that could risk going hungry. I do not support that. I'm willing to work with Republicans to try to craft a farm bill that works for America and do so in a bipartisan way.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Watkins.
I've walked farms with a lot of farmers, and I've met with a lot of agriculture professionals in wheat, corn, livestock, soybeans, sugar, grain, and feed. And what I'm hearing, the resounding message that I'm hearing from them, is that we need a farm bill that includes crop insurance so that their business can have a predictability about it so they can plan for the future. We owe them that. I'm willing to work across the aisle to reach that end.
Gentlemen, thank you. We're going to turn the discussion a little bit to the Me Too movement. It certainly has been a topic nationwide all year long. And as that discussion has unfolded, Congress has been faced with reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act. It currently is extended to December. But if that debate extends to the next Congress, how much of a priority is this legislation for you? And what changes might you push to see included in the Violence Against Women Act?
I'd work hard on to support the Violence Against Women Act. It's incredibly important to me. You know, I got married 4 months ago, and I have sisters, and this is obviously a huge issue for America right now, but it must be done smartly. I'd hate to see the Me Too movement become victims of left-wing radical moms. We're seeing that now, and we're better than that. So I look forward to working on Capitol Hill to protect all American women. Thank you.
Mr. Watkins, thank you. Mr. Davis.
When the Violence Against Women Act was passed, it was passed in a bipartisan manner, and I think it should be reauthorized in the very same manner. You know, throughout my career as a lawyer, I have represented domestic violence victims, and it is an incredible tragedy to see the faces of women who have been abused. And the Violence Against Women Act is a critical component in combating domestic violence. And I think we need to take whatever steps we possibly can to make sure that we protect women and that we reauthorize this very important piece of legislation.
Thank you very much for your answers, gentlemen. Well, candidates will present their closing statements next, and there's more time for more questions. You're watching our 13 News special presentation, Election Coverage 2018, on the congressional race. Back in a moment. Welcome back in. We're especially glad you're joining us tonight for our candidate forum. Well, as we saw in the Kavanaugh hearings, we're living in Washington in a 51-49 world. People are sharply divided on their views, especially about President Trump. Gentlemen, name an area on which the Trump administration you believe is right and an area where you believe they're wrong. And we'll start with Paul Davis on this question.
Throughout my career, I have been willing to work with people from all political stripes. And if elected to Congress, I'm eager and look forward to working with President Trump. President Trump has talked about some priorities that are my priorities and I believe are the priorities of the people in the 2nd District. He's talked about the need for an infrastructure plan to help rebuild America. We critically need to repair our aging infrastructure. In Kansas, we've always taken pride in our good roads that we have, but we're going to need some help from the federal government if we're going to be able to maintain those roads. President Trump has also talked about lowering prescription drug costs. This is a personal issue to me, as I talked about earlier. My dad had to deal with incredibly high prescription drug costs when he was battling Parkinson's, and so many Americans are doing that right now. Where I disagree with President Trump is what we just talked about in the tariffs. I just think the tariffs are really damaging people in agriculture. They're damaging other peoples in various economic sectors, and they're just not good for Kansas. And I think we need to go in a different direction.
Thank you. Mr. Watkins.
Proud of the progress President Trump has made in the economy. Last quarter saw economic growth of 4.2%. Our unemployment we have record low, particularly among African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans. The economy is fantastic. It's booming, and I'm proud of the progress he's made in cutting the taxes and regulations. But I call balls and strikes on Donald Trump. I don't agree with the tariffs. It's the government's job to step out of the way and allow Kansas producers to find demand overseas.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we mentioned this slightly earlier. We'd like your thoughts on a situation that's been developing, particularly this week. There's another group of migrants from Honduras coming toward the U.S. saying they are fleeing violence and poverty. This week, the Trump administration actually said they would end all aid to Honduras if their president isn't able to get them to turn back. And the question is, what responsibility does the U.S. have to assist other countries in improving the circumstances from which these groups are leaving? We begin this question with Mr. Watkins.
I'm very familiar, having worked overseas for many years. I'm familiar with the State and Defense Department affairs. Our State Department has tools at its disposal to help work with these countries in terms of aid and training and support and diplomatic advisory capacity. And so the hope is not only we build up their capacity to grow their economies on the merits of free trade and capitalism. Meanwhile, we help them to fight their own crime and their own problems. So the U.S. is very good at this. We did this. I was involved personally in this in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what we need to do in Latin America as well.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Mr. Davis.
You know, our country's most important responsibility is to keep us safe. And it's clear that we have far too many people that are coming across our border with Mexico. That's why we need to have more border security, and we need to listen to the experts. Right now, we have policies with regards to many countries of allowing people who are already here to stay here because their countries are war-torn or they have gang violence everywhere. And I think that President Trump's suggestion to the president of Honduras is probably just not going to work. And we're going to have to constantly look at these policies, and so that we are making sure that we secure our borders, but also doing so in a compassionate way.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. On to our next question. With all the bitterness in politics and so many issues decided along strict party lines, I want to know, how would you balance party loyalties versus reaching across the aisle? Mr. Davis, we'll start off with you.
As I've said before, I am an American and a Kansan long before I'm a Democrat. And I have a long history of being able to work well with Republicans. I built bipartisan coalition after bipartisan coalition when I was in the legislature to get things done for Kansans. That's why those 36 current and former Republican elected officials, people like former Insurance Commissioner Sandy Prager, have endorsed my campaign. Right now, more than ever, we need people who are going to roll up their sleeves and work with the other political party to solve problems in Congress. We don't need more people who are going to be partisan lackeys and who are just going to create more noise. If we do that, we're just going to expect the same results that we have in Congress. I believe we got to send bipartisan problem solvers to Congress, and that's exactly what I've done and exactly what I will do.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Watkins.
I did help start and grow an engineering and security outfit in Iraq and Afghanistan from 3 people to 470 people. You know, early on in that process, I was advised, Steve, you have to choose. Is this going to be a Sunni organization or a Shiite? I said, no, I'm going to employ both Sunni and Shiite. And they said, no, you have to choose one, Sunni or Shiite. I said, no, if it's a mistake, it's mine to make. So I'm going to have both Sunnis and Shiites. Well, what happened is over time, I was able to get both to work together. And in fact, I doubled down and had females at key middle management roles throughout the organization. That was an accomplishment I was warned to not even try. I'm proud of the progress that I've made. And so if I can bring together Sunnis and Shiites, I can work in a bipartisan capacity on Capitol Hill.
All right. And some final quick answers. Technology, as we're looking ahead, will bring new challenges in matching jobs with workers. How would you improve the workforce getting ready for our modern economy, where many of today's jobs might become obsolete? Steve Watkins, over to you quickly.
All right. Well, technology, obviously embrace technology. It's an important part of me. What I've always maintained, I chose to go to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in part because they're at the cutting edge of technological evolution. So we need to incorporate those the technology advancements into our trade schools, into our academics, and how we do that is we invite industry into the classrooms and make sure that what we're teaching the kids is applicable upon their graduation.
All right.
Thank you. 45 seconds for an answer from Mr. Davis.
Our economy is changing very rapidly. Automation, the retail sector is changing in major ways. And I think what we need to do is we need to invest in proven workforce training programs, whether they are in our K through 12 schools, our community colleges, or places like Washburn Tech right here in Topeka. We also need rural broadband. Rural broadband can help an explosion of jobs and economic development in all across the 2nd District, and it is something that is desperately needed. You know, farmers shouldn't have to operate an irrigation system off of a hotspot. That's why I hope that rural broadband will be part of an infrastructure package that we pass to help rebuild America.
Thank you. And that does conclude our time for questions. We now have a minute and a half for each of you to present a closing statement. We begin that with Mr. Watkins.
Thanks for joining us tonight. You know, my story begins 6 generations ago when my family pushed west and settled in Kansas. More than settled, they homesteaded. And over the generations, we taught values of hard work and honesty and doing what's right. I carried those values with me, and upon graduating high school here in Topeka, I went into the Army. Instead of getting out of the Army as scheduled, I voluntarily extended so that I could go to Afghanistan to fight the Taliban. After that, I helped to start and grow a company, a wholly owned subsidiary, and that was in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's where I cut my teeth on leadership in conflict environments. Now, those values, those heartland values, have carried with me through 75 some odd different countries and 8 years spent outside the U.S. I'd like to bring those to Capitol Hill and fight for you. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and God bless.
Mr. Watkins, thank you. A closing statement now from Mr. Davis.
Well, thank you for tuning in to us tonight. I'm a lifelong Kansan, son of 2 teachers, a husband, a father. We're raising our daughter here because Kansas is our home. I've been a member of my local Chamber of Commerce for almost 20 years. I'm endorsed by police officers, firefighters, and teachers, and those 36 Republican elected officials, because they've worked with me. They know me. They know that I'm a problem solver, that I'm somebody who will work with the other party to get things done. My opponent has been called a liar, a fraud, and a rank opportunist by his fellow Republicans. He hasn't lived in Kansas for over 20 years. He doesn't own property here. He doesn't pay taxes here. In fact, he owns 2 homes in Alaska, and his wife lives in Massachusetts. He never voted in an election until he decided to become a candidate for Congress. We need to send somebody to Washington that we can trust. So if you're ready to send a common sense Kansan to represent you in Congress, who will work to lower our health care costs, who will get our economy working again for working people, and will make sure that our Congress is going to be accountable to us and not the special interest, I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we really appreciate your time with us tonight with the forum. Well, you've heard from the candidates. Now, on November 6th, it'll be up to you. And you'll also see a third candidate on the ballot in this race, whom you saw during the news, Libertarian Kelly Stanley, and you can hear that full interview on WIBW.com.
Now, advance voting is already underway in some parts of the state. Jefferson, Jackson, and Riley counties among those that started yesterday. Shawnee County begins advance voting Monday. General Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th. Polls will be opening at 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Remember, you'll find complete election coverage at WIBW.com/elections.
We did have a wide-ranging discussion tonight. Healthcare, the economy, some various social issues, party politics. You'll be able to see all of that on WIBW.com as well if you want to recap this after this evening. Our sincere thanks to the Steve Watkins and Paul Davis campaigns and the gentlemen themselves for being in our studios tonight and taking the time. And all of you for watching. Sitting alongside Ralph Hipp and Sean Wheat. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm Melissa Bruner. Have a good night, everyone.
With 13 days to go before the election, President